Today I'm going to be walking you through how I reconstructed the thrift store finds that I showed you guys in my latest thrift haul video. One was just a simple hem and taking it in a little bit on the sides, and the other was supposed to just be a simple hem, but it ended up becoming much more. So, let's get started. To shorten the shirt, I laid it out flat. I kept it buttoned up so that I could be sure to cut it evenly. I grabbed a button-up shirt that had the length that I liked, and I used that to help me figure out how short I wanted to cut. I used a piece of chalk to mark out a new hemline. I did want this one to be a tad longer than the other shirt, so I added like an inch or so, and I also made sure to add about half an inch for seam allowance. I apologize for my big old head being in a lot of these shots. I thought I had set it up so that I would barely be in the frame, but obviously I failed. Anyway, I refolded the shirt in half to where the seams were touching so that I could make sure the hem was curved nicely this way as well. And then I cut the hem. I also made a last-minute decision to take the sides in about an inch. I quickly sewed up the sides and then I moved on to the hem. I went around and pinned up about 1/4 of an inch around the edge. I ironed that edge, and then I folded it up another 1/4 of an inch, repinning and ironing again. I probably could have just gotten away with just folding it up and ironing the first fold instead of pinning it and only pinning on the last part, but, well, I guess I just wanted to use my pins. Ironing the hem before sewing helps the fabric from becoming skewed as you sew. Pinning helps too, of course, but the ironing helps just as much. Sometimes I try to skip this step and just go straight to pinning and sewing, but I always end up regretting that decision. So once that was all done, I simply sewed up the hem. Here it is before, and here it is finished. Now on to the more intense reconstruction project. So first, I started seam ripping the skirt portion away from the top. Before I continue on, I feel like I have to say that when I originally bought this dress, all that I thought I was going to do was cut the skirt portion off, hem it, and be done. Easy. But once I got home and really started inspecting it, I realized the sleeves were actually tacked up into that folded position, and once I freed the sleeve and unrolled it, I noticed they were a bit short. So lengthening the sleeve was a thing that I decided I had to do. And because I thought I should make it more complicated for myself, I thought I should make it into a cuff with snap buttons. I also added a few more snap details, but I'll talk about those when I get there. The skirt part of the dress had a bunch of snap buttons on it, so I figured I could just be creative and reuse those bits, so I removed some of those pockets with my seam ripper. Since the cuffs would need to be mirrored images of each other, I was able to just cut one of the pockets in half and use that on the ends. For the rest of the cuff material, I ended up cutting fabric off of the skirt portion that was about as long as the round measurement of the sleeve and twice as wide as the pocket pieces that I just cut. I used a jacket I already owned as a reference to see how the cuff was constructed. I folded the cuff fabric in half, pinned and sewed one of the pocket pieces onto the end. I pinned it along the edge of the sleeve and pinned the other piece of the pocket onto the other end of the cuff, cutting off any extra fabric. I then removed the cuff from the sleeve and sewed all of the cuff pieces together, folding the ends of the pocket pieces under to give it a nice edge. And then I could finally sew the cuff onto the end of the sleeve. Then I repeated that on the other side. All that I had to do was hem the bottom and I'd be done. But wait, I decided to sew in some pockets. I hate when jackets don't have pockets, and I was just gonna skip it for this jacket, but then I decided I just can't have a jacket with no pockets, so I ended up putting in some single welt pockets. I used a tutorial from Ken Andrew Daly. I'm gonna just summarize what I did, but I'll leave a link to his video down below if you want to see a more in-depth tutorial for this type of pocket. I got the measurement that I wanted for my pockets, which was 6 inches tall and about 7 inches wide. I added 2 inches and cut 2 pieces of denim fabric to that size. If I had enough denim left from the skirt, I would have cut 4 pieces, but I didn't, so I ended up using extra fabric from the plaid shirt that I just hemmed to make up for the 2 other pocket pieces. The strip of plaid fabric wasn't wide enough though, so I had to sew 2 pieces together in order to make a single pocket piece. On the wrong side of the fabric, 2 inches from the edges on one side, I made a mark that was 6 inches tall, and then another inch in from the edge, I made another 6-inch mark. Then I marked half an inch in on each side. I marked the midpoint of this rectangle, and then made V-lines on each side, connecting these points together. I placed this piece of fabric, right sides touching, on top of the jacket, positioning it to where I wanted the pocket to be, and then pinned it down along the markings I made. I stitched down both 6-inch markings only, and then I cut the middle line and the V's on each side. Then I was able to push the fabric through the hole I just cut. I smoothed everything down and ironed the edges. From the side that had more fabric, I pulled the fabric up until it was covering the hole. I ironed it again and pinned it in place. I didn't think about how this process would effectively shorten the size of the pocket right here, and my initial measurements were so that it would line up with this seam. When the pocket was done, I wanted to be able to tack the pocket down and hide the extra stitching in that seam, so I needed the pocket to reach that far. I ended up just cutting a small strip of denim and sewing it up to make that side long again. Thankfully I had just enough denim to do that. Anyway, to make sure the flap of denim stays over that hole, and to give the edges of the pocket a nice finish, I sewed around the hole like so. Then I pinned the other pocket piece onto the denim and sewed around the edges to seal the pocket up. To tack the pocket in place, I pinned the edges and sewed along these seams. Now, I could have stopped there, but since I already did so many alterations to this jacket, way more than I initially intended, I figured, what's the harm in one more? I already went this far, so I might as well go all out. A lot of denim jackets have these buttons on the bottom sides of the hem. I'm assuming so people can adjust them to be more fit or something, but I decided that I needed to add some, even though I don't even know what they're for. Thankfully, the skirt portion had more buttons, so I could use it to make this part. I cut and pinned the flap bits to become the thin little flaps like this. Then, to make the part that makes it adjustable, I cut a piece of fabric that had the other side of the snap button and sewed it onto another piece of fabric with another snap button piece about an inch or so away from it. I positioned the fabric with the snap ends onto the jacket so that one of the ends was in line with this back seam, and the other was going towards the front of the jacket. I sewed it down and then snapped the button down onto the snap that was going around towards the front of the jacket so that I could see where I needed to sew that flap down. I pinned the flap and sewed it up on that edge. I repeated on the other side, and finally I was done. Well, with the sewing anyway. I didn't like how each button had a logo on it, so I decided that it had to go. So for my finishing touch, I took a Dremel tool to each button and grinded them down just enough so the logo isn't super obvious. I would have liked to grind it down until you couldn't see any of it anymore, but I was worried about removing too much of the material and ruining the integrity of the button. So after doing that 14 times, I was finally finished. Before I grinded the logos off of the buttons, they had a silver colored finish, but removing the surface of it exposed the brass core, So now the buttons look more of like a brass or gold color, which I actually really ended up liking. So here it is before, and here it is after, all finished. I really love how this thing turned out, thankfully, because that would have really sucked if I spent so much time on this thing and then hated it. But now it's totally ready to have some patches sewn on. In fact, I've been inspired to actually make some of my own patches now, so I decided I'd show you how to do that next week. So tune in for that video if you want to see how to make your own patches and how to attach them to a jacket, or whatever. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, and if you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe. I post art videos every Tuesday and DIY videos every Thursday. You can follow me on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Pinterest, and now Snapchat, and I'll leave the information to those down below. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next week.